Thanks, Carl. We'll see if I can follow that lead. Alan Page called me up a few months ago and asked me to come on up here and talk to you. I'll share some time with you. And when I first picked up the phone, I thought he was going to say, well, I'm looking for your contribution for the Renewable Hudson Renewable Energy. And so I was surprised when he said, we'd like you to talk. And I said, well, what's to talk about? And he said, well, the conference is going to be about the impact of low natural gas prices on renewable energy. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting, Alan. It's a great topic. I know a couple of economists that you might want to talk to come up here and speak about this. How can I help you? And so we thought about it some, and it became evident pretty quickly to me that transmission development is really one of the key factors in integrating renewable energy into the marketplace. As the chairman of the Public Service Commission mentioned earlier, in New York, you have renewable energy located all over the state, primarily up in the Tug Hill Plateau, upstate, and you need to get it to load centers. So how do you do that? You need to build transmission, and you need to do that in an environment where it's competing with natural gas and low natural gas prices, and so somehow this has to be reconciled through various processes. And so this morning, so this morning, I agree with Carl's remark earlier that we had some terrific speakers. It really provided a lot of thought-provoking information, and we heard about how energy markets are capital intensive, they're risky. Fuel inputs are changing constantly over time. There's all sorts of economic drivers. Low natural gas prices are one. Falling silicon prices and the impact on solar PV is another one. So it's always changing. There's regulatory change, and there's transmission. It was a big issue, and it's a big cost item for generators that are deliver power to the grid. So the question is, how does that come into play? And all of this needs to be reconciled through regional processes, through interconnection. So we have these regional transmission organizations, independent system operators. Richard was just up here from the NISO. So they have procedures for interconnection and transmission planning. How does that impact the integration of these resources? What are the economic impediments against that backdrop? And then how's all of this evolving? We're not operating in a vacuum. Regulation is constantly changing. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is where I spend a lot of my practice time, issued a major rule about a year and a half ago. They call it Order 1000. That required utilities to change their transmission planning procedures to account not only for traditional drivers like reliability and market efficiency, in other words, the price of congestion in the state or in the region, but also for renewables. And expressly include that in the transmission planning process and figure out, well, how are you going to allocate the costs for the upgrades that spin out of that. Okay, so what are the key drivers for renewable energy or for transmission investment generally? Well, state policy goals are number one driver. Renewable portfolio standards vary by state. I think in New York it's 25% by 2015 is the goal. Some states have a higher standard, some states have a lower target. But those are having a major impact on investment. Low natural gas prices clearly, and the expected coal generation retirements over the next several years. So that's changing the generation mix. The generation needs to be replaced. What's going to be replaced with natural gas is a low-cost fuel, so that's an obvious source. Environmental regulation is driving it as well. It's increasing the cost of coal-fired generation, coal retrofits, with coal prices actually going up some. It's no longer economic, so a lot of utilities are retiring their coal plants. And then the transmission planning and cost responsibility that I mentioned. So I thought it would be somewhat useful to put all of this a little bit into perspective, the different pieces of the delivered cost of energy, just so you can see how transmission kind of fits into it and how energy and other pieces fit into it. Well, clearly the delivered cost of energy is a major component. And I think Richard mentioned earlier that in New York, well, actually, he was talking about something else. He was talking about the amount of load that's bid in. But you can see in PJM, it's about almost 50% of the delivered cost. And the cost of transmission down in the corner is only about 4%. So it's really a low piece. Now, this is a historical data point in that it reflects the embedded cost of transmission. So it's the depreciated cost. So your mileage may vary when you're talking about bringing in new transmission that might cost $1 billion, $1 billion 345 kV project that's going to, that could have an impact, and it has an impact depending on how you allocate the costs. But this just sort of kind of give you a little bit of a perspective on it. How's the generation mix changing? Well, according to NERC, that's the Global Reliability Count in the country, North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They're expecting 131,000 megawatts of new generation over the next 10 years across the country, and of course they're predicting most of that's going to be gas and wind. And so a lot of this is being driven by the changes that I was just talking about, but also the portfolio standard and also load growth. So we had the last couple of years basically flat load growth or negative growth in some areas. And that has taken some of the pressure off the need to address reliability issues, build power plants and build transmission, but that's changing already. The trend, I think that in downstate New York City a few years ago, they were predicting the need for 8,000 or 9,000 megawatts of new generation just to meet load growth. And that pressure was taken off as a result of the economy. And so now you've got Indian Point, what are you going to do with that? A couple thousand megawatts that are going to have to be replaced. That driver is going to continue to push things ahead. Now, this morning, Ed Cox was talking about renewable energy penetration. What's the generation mix look like? A couple of the other speakers were talking about that. Richard had some data up there, and I pulled some numbers too. So my numbers might be a little bit different than their numbers, but I just wanted to share them with you. It was just facts, but it'll help to put into perspective, what the percentage is of renewables in the total generation mix and so forth. So in New York, you've got roughly 40,000 megawatts of generation, and there's about 2,000 of it is wind. About 4,000 of it is wind. And so when all that wind comes online, the total is going to be about 12.5% of renewable penetration, and that's expected to come online here in the next couple of years, 2 to 3 years. So that's pretty good. That's not the 1 to 2% that you saw people talking about. And you see similar numbers in other regions. California today has about 10% renewable penetration it's got between wind and solar. In PJM, it's a 185,000 megawatt market, and right now there's about 21,400 megawatts of wind in the queue, and there's about 42,800 megawatts of combined cycle gas in the queue by contrast. So again, that reflects the trend of low gas prices, but it's interesting to see how much wind is in the queue, and again, this is the renewable portfolio standards that are driving this. So it's also useful to have in mind what do these fuel types cost. So for combined cycle generation, the installed cost is about $16 a megawatt hour. Wind, you're looking at about $70 a megawatt hour, and solar PV is much higher, about $130 per megawatt hour. But when you compare that to the variable cost, which is really the marginal cost that needs to be recovered in the energy markets for the combined cycle, it's about 48 bucks. And that's notwithstanding the low price of natural gas, and the reason for that is because you have high variable O&M expense for these plants. For wind and solar, it's zero, or close to zero, close enough to call it zero. So what's the change to the mix look like? So right now, it looks like there's going to be 30,000 megawatts of coal that's going to be retired by 2016. The average coal plant, as of the end of last year, was 56 years old. So these numbers could go up. These are old plants, and if the fuel price is high, they can't recover the costs, even if they're depreciated, and they're looking at environmental liabilities and expense, you're going to get rid of them. So you're going to have to replace it with something. And then, of course, the low gas prices are driving this. So the renewable projects, to get built, you have to be able to recover your costs. And it's the same with gas plants. And typically what you need is to have a contract in order to, usually a long-term power sales contract, in order to be able to get financing. In New York, the way it works, as Richard explained, there's only about 50% of the generators actually have contracts, and the rest of them are bidding into the market. So new generation coming online also bears costs for interconnection and transmission related upgrades. And so you have what they call a but-for test under the NYSO tariff, where you want to interconnect, and they study you, and they say, okay, and to interconnect as an energy-only resource, make sure that you're not going to burn down the wires when we hook you up. It's going to cost, $10 million maybe. But if you want to interconnect as a capacity resource, to be able to get collecting capacity revenues in the market and do better financially, then they have to study you as to whether you're deliverable across the state. And so the transmission upgrades associated with that might be 10 times as much. It could be $100 million, sometimes it could be $250, $300 million. In California, I was recently working with some generators who went through the CalISO process, and their study results came back, and for a 250 megawatt generator, they were told it would be $500 million worth of upgrades. So, yeah, so you can these studies are assumption sensitive. So if you assume that you need to have a certain level of robustness in the system, and you make conservative, and utilities typically are very conservative, so they make very conservative assumptions about what it's going to actually cost to build the facilities. They come up with very big numbers, and then the generator gets the bill up front and has to be ready to post a letter of credit or cash or whatever other acceptable form of financing, just in order to be able to go forward with the project. So even if the numbers come in later, let's say they estimate $500 million and it ends up being $200 million, well, that doesn't do the generator any good who decided, well, I might have been economic with $200 million, but I wasn't at 500. Your opportunity is gone. Another factor in New York, New York specific, that impacts the economics of the project is the capacity market. So you get into the energy market to recover your energy costs, and if you're inframarginal, then you get dispatched and you collect the money based upon the LMPs for the hour when you ran. But there's also capacity markets, and a lot of generators count on revenues for being bidding into those markets. And again, you have to have the adequate interconnection status, capacity resource status, or participate in those markets. But look, renewables are treated as having a 10% capacity factor in that market. So in other words, if you're a 100 megawatt project, you get credit for 10 megawatts. And then the prices in those markets are next to zero because there's excess generation. So the wind projects are having a hard time making up. In the energy markets, because they're running off peak when LMPs are low. So they're not making a lot of money there, and then in the capacity markets, they're not making it up. So it's a tough market for the wind generators to survive in. So all of this factors in some form or fashion into the transmission process. And so the transmission process takes into, the planning process takes into account a whole bunch of things. But the key ones are reliability. That's number one. You can't do anything in the system that's going to adversely impact reliability. Market efficiency. So if there's congestion in the system, you want to build transmission to lower the delivered price of energy. And in New York, there's a famous transmission constraint. It's like right behind me on the Hudson River. It's called the Central East Transmission Constraint, and everything on the other side of the river is cheap, and everything on this side of the river is expensive. So it's been a problem in the state for decades. At least it's been a problem as long as I've been practicing law. And so the issue's always been, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to address it? How are we going to get the cheap stuff over here to where it's needed? And that issue is even more pronounced now when you have all of the renewables on the other side of the river and you're trying to get them downstate. And so the other driver is public policy. So how does that factor into the planning process? And I'm going to talk about all of these things in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the transmission drivers, as I'm saying, we don't want to have NERC violations. Load growth is pushing it. These market efficiency projects, which are transmission projects to lower the delivered price of energy. And then policy upgrades. And one of the things that's interesting about the driver for the renewable energy and policy upgrades is federal tax policy, which is unsettled right now because of the budget debates in Washington. And so some of these projects, when I mentioned all the renewable energy projects in the interconnection queue, well, some of those projects may drop out because they're not economic without tax credits to support them. So these renewable energy mandates that I was talking about are a key driver for transmission investment. And so according to NERC, 27% of the new transmission miles that will need to be built in their planning horizon are going to be driven by renewables. That's a huge amount. And so look at the cost. EEI thinks this is $300 billion that's going to have to be spent on transmission. To get to the renewable portfolio standards that folks are talking about, that number is probably low. And it depends really on where you're talking about building. If you're talking about building transmission up in the Tugville Plateau, it's not that expensive, relatively speaking. If you're talking about building it downstate, it's fantastically expensive. It may be $1 million a mile to build transmission out in the boonies, but when you're in a residential area or in a congested area, it could be $10 million or $20 million a mile. Okay, so under the transmission planning process, there's really two sides to the coin. The one side is the interconnection process. And as I was saying before, in New York, they have this flood forecast, so the generator interconnects, they study it, they say, okay, this is what it's going to cost to interconnect you, or just write a check for small unmarked bills. But the other side of the coin is the transmission planning process, and if you have a robust transmission planning process that proactively plans for things like renewables, you can actually plan to build out the transmission system potentially significantly and reduce the cost burden on the renewables that they might otherwise be required to bear under the interconnection process. Interconnection process results are project-specific. Transmission planning process, the results are socialized. So if you say, okay, we're assuming that we're going to, we need, X dollars, X transmission investment for reliability, Y for market efficiency problems or solutions, and Z for public policy, and you put all that in and you put it into the transmission plan and you build it, identify utilities to build it, and socialize it through the transmission tariff. Well, those are transmission upgrade costs that the generators don't have to bear, and it reduces cost burden and cost pressure on them that might otherwise otherwise keep them out of the market under the scenario I was describing earlier. Okay, so all this is in flux. So FERC issued Order 1000 about a year and a half ago. Order 1000 basically required every utility in the country, and the NISO is considered to be a utility. It acts on behalf of all of the state utilities. Required them all to go back and look at their transmission planning procedures, processes, how they study for the need for upgrades, and how they allocate the cost. And these are really hugely political issues. If you're building transmission, like for example, in PJM, you're putting in 500 kV of transmission in New Jersey, and you're telling somebody out in Illinois that they got to pay for it. That can be a tough sell. FERC required all of the regions to plan that and to revise their procedures accordingly. And then in New York, we have the governor's energy highway blueprint, and actually, it's interesting. It sort of dovetails very nicely with what FERC is doing. So, under the planning process, okay, so I just said this. We have this more comprehensive transmission planning process that considers all the drivers, reliability, economics, and public policy. But also, the other interesting variable, and this is also something that's coming up under the governor's highway initiative as it's being implemented by the Public Service Commission, is there's the opportunity for non-incumbents to come in and propose transmission projects. It's something totally new that was never allowed before, because it was always the utility. The utility was the franchise service provider as part of the regulatory compact. They got they had the obligation to serve, but they got to build all of the new infrastructure in their region, and then got to recover a reasonable return on the investment. Now, at the federal level, FERC is saying no, particularly for non-reliability projects, economics or renewable projects to integrate renewables. We think that anybody should be able to build those projects as long as they're qualified. And under the plan being implemented by the Public Service Commission, anybody can come in and make a proposal. It's going to be a competitive solicitation of winners and losers. So today, New York, and Richard, you can correct, feel free to stand up and correct me, Richard. But so far as I understand it today, the NISO does not proactively plan transmission upgrades in order to integrate renewables. They don't plan for public policy needs. But under their Order 1000 compliance plan, they're going to start looking at that. And as I understand it, they're going to defer to the Public Service Commission. So the Public Service Commission goes through this process of the governor's blueprint, picks projects, says, well, here's our proposal, hands it to the NISO. The NISO says, thank you, study it, looks at the plan, make sure that it's technically feasible and can be implemented, maybe tweaks it a little bit, and so that's the NISO's plan essentially for implementing transmission upgrades for public policy projects. That is to work hand in glove with the Public Service Commission, and other regions are looking at doing something similar. PJM has this state agreement approach, where they basically have said that individual states have to decide what their public policy needs are, have to decide what transmission upgrades they're willing to stand behind and pay for. Costs get allocated 100% to ratepayers in that state, not as opposed to being socialized, and then go forward on that basis. That proposal has been disputed at FERC. It's right now. It's in FERC is issuing an order on it today, so I'm going to be interested to see what they actually said on it. As I understand it, as the chairman was saying earlier, the proposals are actually coming in to the Public Service Commission now on how to implement transmission upgrades to address congestion, policy needs, et cetera. Reliability is still in the bailiwick, 100% of the public of the NISO. And so under the Energy Highway Initiative, and I'm glad the chairman's here because he can correct me if I got my numbers wrong, I'm sure he will. But as I understand it, the plan is to build up to $1 billion worth of new transmission projects that can transport over 1,000 megawatts of new energy under the initiative. So $800 million in investment, transmission, generation, distribution, and contracts for up to $250 million within the next year for renewable energy developers. So all of this is designed to feed into the state RPS goal to jumpstart it, to try to achieve this 25% renewable penetration target. Who knows if it'll be achieved, but that's the goal. Okay, so to sum up, I don't know if this sums up or not, but falling gas prices and siting flexibility are giving an advantage to gas-fired generation today, and replacing coal plants and meeting load growth. But of course, we've got the public policy drivers that are giving a boost to renewable energy. So planning for renewables, planning transmission for renewables, that's going to help. Because that's going to, as I was saying earlier, where you have the interconnection process on that side, the cost falls to generators. On the transmission planning process, the costs get socialized. So to the extent that there's more proactive transmission planning for policy upgrades, that's going to help the renewables. It's going to make it more competitive with gas plants that have the luxury of being able to site closer to the load. And then transmission investment is going to be, this is really going to be the key to leveling the playing field. So that's it.
Questions? And then we're going to take a short break, so let's...
Good.
Not you.
Yeah, yes. You sort of opened up my eyes because you told me that it's going to cost $300 billion to upgrade the grid in the next 20 years, and the Electric Car Research Institute says it's going to cost another $476 billion over the next 20 years to institute a national smart grid.
Yeah.
So that's real money.
I didn't tell you that, by the way. That was NERC.
Okay. So how do we analyze the cost effectiveness of this big system that we've established? And where do we really want to put our resources in terms of either distributed energy, microgrids, long transmission lines down the Hudson River? How do we figure out the big picture here?
Well, it's case by case. I mean, is the short answer. It's project by project, proposal by proposal. Reliability projects are driven by the need to meet the reliability criteria. NERC has specific criteria. You can't buy. It all has to, the whole system has to work. So there's no choice in that matter. Those costs, those drivers are a little bit hard to predict, but they're all constantly being studied. So on the market efficiency upgrades, they typically have to pass a cost-benefit metric. So you look at each project, where's it proposed to go, how much is it going to cost, how much is it likely to reduce the production cost and delivered cost of energy, and as long as it's greater than, typically it has to be at least 1.25 benefit to 1. If you pass that metric, then you go forward with the project. Public policy upgrades are tougher because they're not meeting any defined need. There's no reliability need, and you may not be lowering the delivered cost of energy. As a matter of fact, you may potentially be increasing the delivered cost of energy with public policy. So that's why they're so contentious. That's why PJM has said, well, we're only going to do this if the state steps up, that wants these and agrees to pay for it. So it's really how do you define the benefits that you're, and how do you do this holistically? You can't. I don't see how you can do it holistically.
Have you factor in the cost of outages in this whole scenario?
Certainly there are outage costs, and you can come up with, the swags. you can come up with a wild guess as to what you think the outage costs are. You can look at some historical examples. What do you include in that? Do you include consequential damages from outages and some ripple effects from lost productivity and so forth? mean, I really don't know how you do that. I mean, ultimately, it's got to be done the way it's been done, I think. Focus on reliability, number one. Market efficiency, number two. And then, okay, so the states, as a policy matter, decide there's value in renewable energies, greenhouse gas reduction, and so forth. And so society has to be willing to pay for it.
Al, you got a question?
Public, the actual reliability of the system, planning for that's still under the auspices initiated by the ISO, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's just public policy that bubbles up from other public entities.
That comes in sort of, it's interjected into the process as an overlay. And number one, their job is to keep the lights on, and so they plan meticulously to meet reliability needs. And then these other market efficiency and public policy come in, or there's basically proposals by others to address perceived needs.
Isn't the primary public policy issue of trying to achieve the renewable portfolio standard? I mean, that's the big driver, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the number one driver.
That's the number one driver. So achieving the renewable portfolio standards established within each state.
Yeah, there should be no misconception about economic drivers for renewable energy. It's just not happening. It's all strictly public policy.
Absolutely. Go ahead, yeah.
A number of states have adopted the community choice aggregation policies. I don't know that New York has done so yet. But community choice aggregation allows municipalities or neighborhoods or larger areas to decide to purchase green power of one sort or another, or potentially to curtail use within a called a smart grid region, say microgrid area, and be able to potentially sell that megawatt, to use Amory Lovett's term, back on the grid. Do you see any prospects for that in New York State, integrating that into the energy equation?
I don't know, Richard, what do you think?
It comes down to, with fires and so on, changing stakeholder process. As far as the New York ISO market, so
Just stand up, Richard, so we can hear you.
yeah, I'm only speaking for the New York ISO markets, which is not the totality of how energy gets bought and sold in New York State. It's a stakeholder-driven process. Reliability would be key. I mean, any development, any kind of transaction gets measured against the risk to reliability and is subject to adjustment or cancellation if the rules of reliability are violated. But it would come down to sort of public interest there would be.
Do you know if any motions been made at the legislative level to make the CCA state?
Mr. Chairman, you want to?
It sounds like
it's in your
I've not heard
opinion.
many legislative proposals on this issue.
Nor have I. I don't think it's on the legislative agenda anyplace here.
I believe it is definitely being considered.
But it's not at the legislative level. We were asked to see whether the legislators considered it, One last question?
And I'll just note, we're getting through the budget. I think today they finally got announced that then the rest of the agenda. So it
may percolate up, absolutely. It's been discussed, but not.
Are we in the black and the red?
Okay, let's take a brief outside.
Yeah, I was, 10 minutes.